I believe it's begin recording, Mark.
Very good, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for making time for the monthly CJPAC meeting. So glad to be gathered together virtually for our February 25th meeting. I appreciate everyone making time, knowing the demands on your schedules and how much you're trying to cover. I hope that today's meeting is a helpful immersion into criminal justice data and system trends and conversation, collaboration, problem solving among the members of the commission. I'm going to, instead of going through the laborious exercise of asking everyone to introduce him or herself, because we have been together for quite a while, I'll just go through the folks who are on the commission who are in the room and just say a quick hello. You're more than welcome to turn your mic and say a quick hello too. But I'll just try to keep it a little bit breezy and just kind of keep moving so that everybody has a chance to say a quick hello, test out their mic, and then we can launch right into the meeting. Director Begg, Humayun Begg, so happy you're here from CJPAC. Thank you for making the time.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. And then so happy, Beth Hamilton. We missed you last month. You were well represented by Lucy Nolan, but we're thrilled to have you back. Thank you for being here.
Mark, thank you.
In the last meeting, as you might remember, Demas stole the show. We had a tremendous presentation from Dr. Norco and Mr. Chris Burke. I see Mr. Burke on the line. I know Dr. Norco had a commitment, but good morning, gentlemen, or good morning, Chris.
Good morning, everyone.
From the DOC, I know it's a busy day. I'm seeing Deputy Commissioner Carlos. I know Commissioner Quiros was trying to join, hot off the voice vote in the House confirming his nomination yesterday. But I know this is a big day for the department with a graduation of a new class of corrections professionals happening. So I'll just say hello to Deputy Commissioner Carlos. I know you have members of your team on the line here too. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, Mark, and Commissioner.
Oh, I see.
Good morning, Mark. How you doing?
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for making time. I know this is a big day for the department and welcoming in a new class.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And then in it's funny order here. We have the Chief Public Defender, Attorney Rapillo, and the Chief State's Attorney, Rich Colangelo, are showing up one after the other on my screen. I don't know, maybe Teams is just reflecting the harmony that we maintain on this commission. But good morning, ma'am, and good morning, Chief State's Attorney Colangelo.
Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, everybody.
And then I see from the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, a person I follow closely on Twitter, Brian Foley. Glad you're here, sir. Thank you for making the time.
You're the one who follows me. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody.
That's how I learn about my places to eat and in the Hartford area. Now, along with many other public service and public safety you provide, sir, you do point out some of the best haunts in the capital city.
That's why I was hired for restaurant recommendation.
Good morning, sir. Glad you're here, sir. Thank you. I see that someone may have a hand up, but for some reason I'm not seeing who is raising that hand. And I see it's off now. Terrific. And Jerry Wild, Ms. Wild, I'm so happy you're here from the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I know that Stephen Epler Epstein had a conflict, maybe two conflicts, but we're happy you're here representing the coalition, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you.
Chairman Giles, I'm thrilled to see not only yourself, I know you have, I think you'll be attending the graduation as well. I see also you have Bill Maris and Rich here as well from the board. So good morning, sir.
Absolutely. Good morning to all of you. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
So glad you're here, sir. And Judicial Branch Director Gary Roberge, glad you're here, sir.
Morning, everybody. Good to see you.
And two of my colleagues, I might call them because of the hours we spend together on the Juvenile Justice Policy Oversight Committee. I'm thrilled to see Vin Russo from DCF, as well as from SDE, John Prasinelli. So good morning, gentlemen.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy to be here.
Hey, Mark. Good morning. Happy to be
here.
Thanks
gentlemen.
Thanks for inviting us. It's nice to see Beth Hamilton and Lucy Nolan, folks I haven't seen since before the pandemic. Many of the rest of you I see regularly. And just to comment about Brian Foley, if you follow him on Facebook, you also get some nice videos of him dragging his kids around his yard behind an ATV. In the snow, in sleds.
Wow.
I probably should add that.
That seems like something out of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, something Chevy Chase would do. That's a sign of a tried and true committed parent.
Thanks for clarifying that, John. I may have had to make a call or two.
Exactly, Vinny.
Oh, you all are great. Thank you. Is there anyone I forgot? Oh, sorry, Ms. Deneen, Lori Deneen. I was chatting with you before, and I took for granted that was pre-recorded. We're so happy you're here, man. Thank you for your membership and participation.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to see everyone today.
Yes, indeed. And then thank you. And then anyone that I have unintentionally omitted who would like to say a quick hello or introduce him or herself?
Hello, this is Jane Siegel from the DVA. I'm here as well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Ms. Siegel, so happy you're here, and sorry I missed you. So happy you're here for the meeting. Well, very good.
Good morning, Mark. Judge Carroll is on the line as well. I'm sorry I joined a little bit late.
Oh, Judge, no apologies needed. So happy you're here. And I know that the commute was never a joy for Thursday morning CJPAC meetings, although I know you're in the chambers well before 9 usually, but it did add a bit of 9 a.m. CJPAC added a new kind of dimension to the commute in the start of the day. So maybe one of the silver linings to our virtual environment, a bit easier in some respects.
There's no two ways about it. The commute is a lot easier. Although I must admit that sometimes I long for those days of a longer commute and more routine operations. But considering everything that's taken place, I think all of us have done a good job in making the adjustments that we need to make.
Yes, sir. If there were to be a word cloud of the different terms I used in last year, I think adaptation was one that I used almost every meeting several times to just regarding the criminal justice system. Didn't have the ability to hit the pause button when the pandemic began. It was instant adaptation and adjustment and leadership in maintaining essential operations and adjusting as needed based on the impact. Yes, sir.
I think you're right.
I distribute, sorry, and then is there anyone else that I unintentionally omitted who would wish to say a quick hello or to the members of the meeting, members of the commission? Okay, very good. We had distributed the minutes from the January 28th, 2021 CJPAC meeting. I wondered if anyone had any requested changes or revisions or questions?
Move to adopt, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mass for a second.
Second.
Thank you. First and seconded. Thank you. Minutes have been approved. Thank you. And Chief Kinney contacted me just before the meeting to say that he would be unable to attend because of a urgent matter came up. So absolutely, obviously, we understand and look forward to his attendance at the next meeting. This is a meeting that we look forward to. This is crunch time, the month of February, and I'd like to recognize the members of our research unit, Kyle Bowdwin and Kevin Neary and Patrick Leka. February involves the production and release of 3 different reports for them. It's the monthly indicators report. It's the annual prison population forecast, which attempts to estimate the next 12 months changes in the correction population, up or down or flat, and then what are the factors that might contribute to that. So it helps us to plan and anticipate. Number 3 is the release of the recidivism report, which in some ways is looking back at people who completed a term of incarceration and were transferred or discharged from the Department of Correction. We track over a 3-year period returns to prison and different aspects about that return to prison to look at kind of outcomes. And that helps us to, I think, then shift forward to identify challenges or barriers or opportunities to improve outcomes within the system. And so I think this will be a helpful, robust presentation that delves into the subject matter. I thought also it'd be helpful just to emphasize this will be a pretty heavy emphasis on correction issues. And we try really hard in CJPAC to diversify the topics that we cover so that we're attending to the diverse backgrounds and focus areas and topics that are managed by the members of the commission. I remember last year we covered everything from housing to changes in dual arrest and efforts to support police responding to domestic violence issues, intimate partner violence. We covered a host of issues involving substance addiction and mental health. We looked at ESI programs and so much more. And I'm really hoping for a diverse array of subject matter and topics in the year ahead. Last month we looked at reviewed a report on the issues of mental health in the criminal justice system. We looked at the Justin Well report and looked at topics of competence to stand trial, and that helped to open up topics to people who are entering the criminal justice system with mental disorders, and what are opportunities to provide swift and effective connections to treatment. For upcoming meetings, we'll be hearing from CJPAC about the rollout of its next phase of electronic of data, including the search feature to enable search across 14 criminal justice system databases, as well as electronic workflow transfer of arrest records and other police files to courts around our state. So I think that will be a nice cross-cutting topic of ways this electronic information is contributing to a more effective criminal justice system. Attorney Rapillo will be presenting with the Board of Pardons and Paroles about the establishment of a pilot for providing counsel to people with parole violation hearings, so we can learn a little bit more about what that's uncovered regarding the parole violation hearing process and how collaboration between Board of Pardons and the public defender can be helpful. And I think a topic that's been a recurring one within the Victim Issues Subcommittee, which I've had the pleasure of attending in recent months, has been what are ways that we can incorporate more data and information on victims into the routine work of both CJPAC and broader criminal justice system work. So we don't have, as far as I know at the current time, a scheduled date or a specific topic, but it's been a very helpful recurring topic of how can we ensure that victims are receiving services and supports to help promote a return to wellness and recovery financially, in terms of medical and mental health needs and more. So I think that as the discussion evolves today, there will be some return to that. But I did always want to just make sure that, toward the start of the meeting, we're thinking broadly about different topics that perhaps haven't been covered that people would be interested in bringing up or ensuring gets put onto the table for our discussion today. I'll just open up for any questions or comments from anybody that they might have at this point. They're more than welcome to. Okay. Well, feel free to weigh in throughout the meeting or when the time comes up. And I should note, just from a meeting facilitation perspective, for those who have the raise the hand feature on Microsoft Teams, feel free to press that button. I now can see it when you raise your hand. Earlier versions I could not. Also, feel free if you can't operate that function. I know some people are on a more limited Teams. Perhaps they can't do that. Please feel free to come off mute to say, hello and jump in. We're a informal and flexible group. Again, feel free to cover that. So I will turn to the monthly indicators report, and in a minute, my colleague Kevin will pull up the presentation that covers chart 2A in the monthly indicators report. And I wanted to maybe mention one thing just to kick off before we put up the screen was we've been, and I want to thank Gary Roberge for and his team and others at the Judicial Branch for just talking to us about ways we can modify and expand the monthly indicators report to incorporate more front-end criminal justice system issues. We have a fairly complex and robust review of ways that people may transition from the DOC to the community. We look at the different types of discretionary release. We look at discharge. We'd like to develop a similar format in the front end and this is a real credit to Mike Hines and folks at CSSD under the judicial branch, for how we can capture pretrial service referral, ways to capture front-end diversion, ways to capture use of jail re-interview, perhaps in a more systematic or detailed way. And finally, the treatment pathways program. That'll really open up where I think a lot of people are interested, from the public defender, the judge, the chief state's attorney side, and others, about what are the front end options that are available to ensure that we reserve our correctional capacity for people who present serious risks or have very serious charges, and use the community system where appropriate for suitable populations. So I kind of put those topics out there for food for thought, and I would share kind of one observation that's not in the presentation that we came upon, which is the apparent reduction in the size of the probation population. And there is not a chart in the monthly that tracks, over many years, that population. And that was a bit of an eye-opener for us, that you really have to look at chart two-way and compare multiple monthly indicators reports to see the trends in the probation population. But when we compared past monthly indicators reports to this one, we saw that the adult probation population had gone down by about 2% from the last month, and about 18% from a year ago, which would seem to suggest efforts within the probation system to really prioritize and front load its supervision and treatment and program resources for people at higher risk earlier in their terms, where we know that recidivism is of greatest likelihood. So I want to acknowledge that's one of the bullets we have on our bullet points that we have on our front page. And in case anyone from the judicial branch would care to weigh in, or others would care to about that topic or others, I wanted to give them that opportunity before we brought up the presentation.
Yeah, so Mark, this is Gary from Judicial. If I could have a minute, we've seen decreases in adult probation over the last 10 to 12 years, and I think it's a combination of factors. With decriminalizing some statutes that would otherwise come to probation. There's just fewer cases coming into the overall system year after year after year, right? But I also think it's due to the good work that this body's doing collectively, and the work that we're doing in the branch with respect to people coming back through the system that are sentenced to a period of probation supervision by the court. It's also an acknowledgement to our community service providers that we send to our adult behavioral health network, our alternative in the community network, for services and the great work that they're doing. So I think it's and then again, right, what we've gone through in the past year to see the most significant decrease over the last year. It's because fewer cases right now are able to go to disposition because of COVID and our current court operations. So I would think we're going to see an uptick in 2021, or not a decrease as we have seen over the last years, just due to the fact that we have pending cases that will ultimately get disposed in the next 6 to 8 months, or over the course of this calendar year and into 2022. But I think it's just a positive trend, and I think it's something that we're seeing throughout all of our metrics in the criminal justice system. We've seen a significant decrease in the Department of Correction population that we're going to look at today and talk about today. So I think it's all a positive for the state of Connecticut. But I think it's, like I said, collectively the work going on with this group here, and the work going on in the branch with the people that we're providing services to. So thank you for the opportunity to comment, Mark.
No, thank you, sir, and kudos for your work on this. I'm a big believer in probation. I believe that it is the single biggest diversion option post adjudication that's available in the criminal justice system. It's the single most effective way to provide meaningful programming, treatment, supervision for people suitable and able to demonstrate appropriateness of avoiding a jail or prison. And research shows the biggest behavior change occurs when programming is delivered in the community as opposed to within a correctional institution. And so it occurred to me just that this is a kind of perhaps a gap in our monthly that we should be incorporating, and whether it's achieved, Director, through this discussion and engagement of you and CSSD and the broader judicial branch in these meetings, or it makes sense to incorporate it into some of our reports. It would be helpful, I think, to look at the trends in the probation population to make sure that there are the population is heading in a direction that enables you and the officers to focus their time, their interventions, their programming on highest risk earlier in their term populations.
Yeah. Whatever you need from us, Mark, we're here. We'll, as always, we'll work with you on the monthly indicator report. And as you know, the branch, I mean, Judge Carroll's very particular about making sure that we collect as much data as possible to inform our work and our decisions and how we do our business, and to get better at what we do. So, we have a lot of information, and however we can add it to this process and to inform our discussions here, we're happy to do so.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Terrific, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from anyone before the transition? Okay. Well, Kevin, if you don't mind seizing control of the meeting and bringing up the PowerPoint, that would be great. And I would just say we're going to be walking through a chart two-way, and I thought it was really instructive to see some analysis that Kyle did. And Kevin, feel free to go on to slide 2. And I just would note if Commissioner Quiros would care to in a minute, or another member of the department would like to, we've been really eager to receive the DOC's thoughts on this. So, on Monday, February 8th, Governor Lamont announced the intended closure of Northern Correctional Institution. I think this is the first facility to be announced for closure in the 2020s. There were closures in the previous decade, and in the 1990s, there were significant increases. So there was kind of reflection of the total correction population and its changes from 2008 when it reached its peak, and following that experienced a decline along the time that Connecticut reported substantial reductions in reported crime and arrest, which I think, to me, what I always want to make sure of is that we're focusing both on the public safety indicators as well as the correction population indicators. And so it creates something of a narrative of a state that can experience these reductions in crime and arrest, achieve better criminal justice system outcomes overall, and therefore rely less on jails and prisons to a certain degree. We thought that a more nuanced and focused approach, however, was on Northern Correctional Institution itself, because the DOC manages its overall correction system capacity and refers its population to the appropriate facility based on a whole variety of indicators, from security to safety to risk to various groups to programming to point in the correction process and more. So in many ways, each facility is its own island to some degree. And Northern is the only level 5 maximum security facility in Connecticut's correction system. There are high security levels in multiple facilities, but Northern was of a higher security level as a whole than the other facilities. And it opened in 1995 in Summers. And this chart, I think Kyle did a really great job of not only presenting the population per month in Northern from 1995 to current year 2021, but he provided some changes in operations along the way that would seem to correlate with the changes in the population. Overall, I just was struck before going into some of the details along the way, that the fact that the population opened in March, the facility opened up in March, reached this historical high in 2003 of over 500 people, and after that, with various fits and kind of increases and decreases, eventually reached a population of 55 people in 2021. That's a 89% reduction. What I found interesting is if you look at the flags that Kyle provided, just as a kind of far 10,000 foot level marker, you can see that as the certain units were added from the chronic discipline unit, the security risk group, the chronic discipline unit, sorry, let me back up. The chronic discipline unit, the security risk group, the high bond transfers, when those populations were added to Northern, the population went up. But I think through this, I was really noting a quote that the commissioner provided on February 8th regarding the announcement. He said that the reduction in Northern, speaking just that facility, in particular with his remarks, addressed the exceptional interpersonal skills, superior conflict resolution abilities, and overall understanding and application of criminal justice reform, which really keyed me into the fact that the population changes were in many ways a reflection of the evolution of DOC policy and practice. I guess I would say also state policy regarding the management of people in correctional facilities. And I wanted to point out, and just sort of my connection of narrative to this slide is the changes that DOC applied in administrative segregation, in discipline, in mental health, in an ability to use units and wings and other parts of facilities to rely less on this one facility for the population that is reaching to the point on February 8th of the announcement occurring. So in some ways, the announcement was a reflection of past policy, past practice that achieved this point. It's not as much a forecast, that we expect the population to go down and therefore can make this move. This was years in the making. And I wanted to tie in the policy and practice, because I think that Commissioner does a great job of highlighting that it's the work of the people every day who come to the facilities that achieve so many of the outcomes that DOC reports at meetings like this one and others. And in this case, there was a staff related dynamic here worth pointing out in terms of the implementation of policy and the carrying out of practice. So we were really encouraged to include this analysis and share our position on it, but I know that it would be really helpful if anyone from the DOC or others would care to weigh in and perhaps elaborate on this chart or share additional insight.
Good morning, Mark. This is Commissioner Kiros.
Morning, sir.
So the decision to close Northern, this has been going on for probably the last 4 to 5 years. Elected officials, advocacy groups, wanting for that facility to close. That facility, when opened in 1995, definitely served the purpose of, that was a time and period where the Department of Correction was experiencing melees, riots, disturbance. I think the last one was in 1995 in Carl Robinson that ended up with 2 individuals in their custody that were murdered. Once we opened Northern up, we saw all the violence decrease. But then we started seeing large numbers of individuals ending up on the administrative segregation program and staying there for a while too. And it was always based on behavior driven. And that's how you got in 2003 to that 507. When you see the dip in 2013, that is the work of then Commissioner Arnone and Deputy Commissioner Sorrenda, who after became our commissioner. We partnered up with Yale, and we did an overhaul of our administrative segregation program. And basically, this was an incident that came to light on an 18-year-old kid who discharged from Northern, went back out into the community. I believe it was Bridgeport, was attending school for like 6 or 7 months with no problems. So he was interacting with his peers at the school, no problems. I believe he was on parole. The day before the graduation, he went to a convenience store and got hit with larceny 6. And immediately when he came into the Department of Correction, because he discharged with an AS status, he was reviewed for administrative segregation status, and within 24 hours, he ended up at Northern. And so you ask yourself, this individual is 18 years old, out in the community, in the public school system for 6 or 7 months, and doing well, goes into the convenience stores. I believe he stole a candy bar, got hit with larceny in 6th degree, and within 24 hours, Department of Corrections indicated this is the worst of the worst. And that really, that case right there really opened our eyes, where we revamped that whole entire program, the AS program. We put gatekeepers, meaning that no longer a warden could just put an individual on a bus and send him to Northern pending review. So the gatekeepers became the 2 district administrators. So there was no movement in offenders going into Northern without the approval of the district administrator to be reviewed for an AS hearing. And basically what we did, we made sure that if we ever had to go to court again, we can stand in court and say, you know, this individual is the worst of the worst. And then we went out and moved the AS Phase 2 and Phase 3 program out of Northern and put them at Cheshire to give the staff there and the individuals that were leading the program just a fresh start. Different site, different location, different staff members, because and I was the warden at Northern. I can tell you for 2 years that it gets tense in there with staff and the offender population. So that's the reason that our numbers with the AS program at Northern at 2013 started to drop. Based on best base, we did put a high bond population there, and we moved them out. And then when COVID hit in 2018, when we needed to quarantine, the quickest way to quarantine was going into the empty units up at Northern. And we did that. And then in June, we announced, June 2020, we announced that we're going away from Northern with a medical isolation unit into McDougal. We're in the middle now, Mark, to, again, I think it's time, the time has come to, we had 2 committees going on reviewing our AS, Administrative Segregation program, and our Security Risk Group program. And there is going to be significant changes to the program, but keeping the safety and security piece as a priority. For example, the length of an AS program is a year. I mean, what data is there out there that says that that's the right length of time for that program? So we're definitely looking at reducing the time of length in these programs in order to get these individuals into this program that's driven based on behavior, but then out just enough time to complete the program and understand that their behavior was wrong, and then get them back out to general population. And then the decision to close Northern for me was the right decision. I think that this is the opportunity. Criminal justice reform is not going away, and this is the best opportunity for us to be at the table, review our policies, and make the necessary changes that's aligned to the criminal justice reform. And so I think it's a great first step. The advocacy groups and elected officials loved it, but I had to live that whole day going up there and telling the staff that we're closing Northern. And you know, as you can imagine, disappointment from the staff. Northern was always a security blanket for them, knowing that something happened that was bad, that the population could always be transferred there. What gives me confidence, Mark, is that this population has been in every maximum level 4 facility that we've had. The AS population, the SRG population have been managed at Gardner, Cheshire, McDougal, Walker, and Corrigan. The death row population has been managed at Osborne. So I'm comfortable that we'll have an operational plan where we'll manage these individuals away from Northern and move away from that facility. That is it. I'll take any questions if you guys have any questions for me.
Thank you, sir. I knew regarding the morning when the announcement was made, I remember I wasn't there with you, but a coworker of mine was, who said that first shift, the officers were told the news, and efforts are being taken to help to provide a transition and I think as you regarding the population, the operational plan being in place, the fact that you've been planning and preparing, I think, it really speaks to how past work led to the announcement being made, and the ability to focus correction resources more effectively on other facilities, recognizing that this population can be held in Northern currently, can be safely and securely managed in level 4 wings and units and other facilities. So thank you very much for walking us through it, sir.
Thank you, Mark.
Are there anyone on the call who would wish to ask any questions or share any other insights with the commissioner or the group? Okay. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And it is okay with the group. We'll turn on to Ken, if you don't mind, to the next two slides from now, and we'll go to the prison population forecast. And this is an essential part of the work that we provide to this commission. Because it covers it informs, it's at the heart of every month indicators report that we produce. We look at where the prison population has moved in the last month to see if it's on track or off track with the original forecast. So if you mind going to the next slide, Kevin, I thought that you could, I'll just quickly give a big overview of the forecast, and then invite you to perhaps go through some of these methodology of the forecast and how it's done. Because, for folks who are experienced with CJPAC in past years, this is nothing new, but it's helpful for me just to process it by stating it, that it's based on an array of prior variables and trends. There is a simulation created based on those variables that we know up to the minute that the forecast is released, of where we project the population will trend in the next 12 months. And I think having not only an annual forecast in our state is very important, so that we can project out and try to plan accordingly, but we have the ability to track on a monthly basis where there are anomalies. What I think the big message for today is that when you're looking at an entire correction population in a state like ours, that's a large N size. So it really takes a lot of external or internal factors to create a substantial change in the trajectory that population is on. You'll see a chart that Kevin will walk you through shortly that just shows how incredibly straight the line has been in the correction population over the last, I would say roughly 12 years. It's really major events like the COVID-19 pandemic, like the suspension of parole back in 2007 and 8, and other effects that really changed it. Outside of that, what you really see is a system largely at equilibrium. It can have increases or decreases to a minor degree, and we've done a fairly good job of being predictive of where this population is headed. In fact, in the last 5 years, we've been plus or minus, I think, 5%. But 2020 really was the exception. So I'm hoping that as Kevin goes through these next slides, it'll help to reflect on the last year and some of the trends we talked about at this meeting, and look ahead to the next 12 months in a way that we hope is helpful to the broader criminal justice system. Along the way, please feel free to raise your hand or by pressing the button, or jump in with any questions. We will pause at the end of this forecast section for discussion. And of course, Commissioner, to the extent you can stay with us, we'd be grateful for any insights you have along the way. So please don't hold back. I know you won't. But with that, I might turn to you, Kevin, if you don't mind, to drill in perhaps the methodology behind this forecast, and I'll give you the floor.
Thanks so much, Mark. Thanks. And just before I get rolling, just if you could just give me a thumbs up to make sure I'm coming through clearly, that the internet gods are smiling upon me this morning.
They are smiling broadly, loud and clear, and very nice tie.
Thank you. So no, and you gave a great kind of precursor context to this, which is, I think methodologically speaking, I think the key pieces for folks to remember as I kind of walk through the forecast coming up is just that the main drivers of our forecast have traditionally been the historic time trend data of the correction population, and we look at inputs and outputs into the correction facilities within Connecticut. So we look at people coming in and exiting the system month to month, and then year to year, and look at those changes month to month, year to year, and over other various periods of time. And really, the forecast is largely driven by those dynamics. But there is also, I think it's important to remember, a qualitative component to it as well, which is informed by commission meetings like this, discussions that we have with partners at DOC, with partners at Judicial, to better understand sort of whether there's regulatory, policy, operational changes that might substantially shift typically the patterns that we might see month to month or over time. So there is, while it is largely driven by this time trend, there is also to some extent factoring in our qualitative understanding of any changes that might be occurring that could affect the system over time. But I think the point that Mark raises ultimately is over the last 10, 12 years, there's really been a very strong kind of linear trajectory. So let me move to that so folks can really see what I'm talking about when I say that. So if hopefully this is coming up, it might be a little quicker on my machine, so I'll give it a brief second here to populate. But what this graph starts with is February of 2008, which I believe is a peak period, and then obviously the data points here run through February of 2020. And to that linearity point, you can really see, particularly in the last 4 to 5 years, a very, very strong kind of straight line decline. I think on average it was 3.8% annually decline in the correction population. But obviously there's some seasonal variation, so you'll see that line move a bit. But ultimately, you know, if I were to try to fit a straight line through all these points, it would look kind of like a mountain slope headed straight down over time. And that's generally, you know, in prior years when we would do a forecast, obviously our forecast would produce numbers that would kind of reflect some of that variation month to month and seasonally, but it would ultimately sort of fit this trajectory over time. But as we know, after February 2020, when OPM released last year's forecast, COVID happened, and that dramatically shifted the trajectories and the actuality of the correction population in the state of Connecticut. So this is a graph that takes that same point and kind of fills in the COVID period onward. And what you see is that COVID made just a massive disruption to that linear trend. It starts kind of taking on almost a exponential or like, as we like to say colloquially, kind of a hockey stick shape during 2020. And obviously in the early months of the pandemic, those declines in the population were much more significant, so larger, steeper drops. And then in the more recent months, toward the end of 2020, sort of a slowing, leveling out of that. So that's what sort of gives it our hockey shape. I'll pause for a second. I see, Mark, you have your hand raised. So
yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. I wanted to just mention, just for as folks get their eyes on the chart, is that the chart does not begin at 0, so it does emphasize the drop. You know, if it began at 0, it would look a lot less steep. But we felt that for the emphasis needed as we reviewed this slide with you, we wanted to enhance it a bit. The other thing to share is that just before this chart begins is when Connecticut reached its peak in the correction population. And it's really during this period too, the last 12 years, that a reduction occurred. So I did want to, you know, Kevin did a great job of capturing just how gradual, you know, and kind of modest year to year the decline is. I wanted to make sure that the chart is presented to you in a way that aligns with his description. So thanks for letting me barge in, Kevin. I wanted just to share that piece.
Not a problem. And thank you for pointing that out. To Mark's point, I think if we had started our axes there at 0 going up to 20,000, a lot of that variation would be very hard to pick out. So we started a little higher to make it a little easier on the eyes to kind of see these trends that we're talking about. But it's good to bear in mind, and hopefully that's clear to viewers who might look at this slide after this presentation. So I think, again, yes, just to kind of put a bow on this, 2020, the impacts of COVID were just unprecedented. And I think, if a forecast had somehow existed that had been able to accurately predict the COVID pandemic and this drop off, I don't think, prior to the actual onset of COVID, we would have been able to believe that. So really, I think, when we got to the end of this forecast cycle for the last year's forecast, there was a massive, by relative standards, and most years were within 5%. Last year we were this past year we were significantly diverged from the actual correction population. So that puts us, in terms of forecasting the future, in kind of a unknown territory, in that the trends that we had seen year to year over many years have kind of shifted. And so as a unit, we have been kind of grappling with how at the point that we are now, kind of post-COVID, where we see this trajectory sort of heading. And so one of the ways we sort of grappled with this and thought best about informing the 2021 forecast that we wanted to produce was, first, we would sort of go back and speak to that kind of historic trajectory. And we basically projected that historic trajectory out for 4 to 5 years to February 2026, just to kind of get a feel for, with some seasonal variation, had COVID potentially not occurred, what that trajectory might have looked like overall. So as you can see, that green line kind of represents the forecasting out of the pre-COVID trajectory. And I think what's important for us to kind of bear in mind as we started developing the 2021 forecast is, as Mark alluded to, this is a complex system with lots of pieces, and it tends to kind of move in a concerted direction, but doesn't most years shift dramatically in the way that, unlike the way we saw with the COVID pandemic. So there is some sort of kind of feeling that we all had, and again, this is more of a qualitative understanding, that the system would likely want to, over time, sort of move back to this overall historic trajectory that we've seen. So kind of want to move over time toward this green line in 6 years' time. So the questions that we started grappling with as a research unit is exactly how and when does this system sort of progress back towards that overall historic trajectory. So one of the ways that we sort of started thinking about this was a couple different models and of timings of how that might occur. And so we sort of modeled out 3 different sort of scenarios. One we would call a very, very fast, almost a V-shape return toward that trajectory. One more of a moderate, kind of longer progression back towards that historic pre-COVID trajectory. And then a third, which would be sort of a slower regression. That last sort of red line being the slow regression, sort of modeled on the more recent couple of months of data where there were declines, not steep, but kind of a solid slow decline over time. So modeling sort of that trend of the last couple of months out several years further. And we sort of looked at these kind of 3 different scenarios, and in concert with both the DOC and folks at Judicial and some of the other kind of commissions that were involved in, had a series of conversations that kind of helped us understand which of these scenarios might be more likely, or which one, based on our understanding of how the system is, the justice system in Connecticut is operating currently, might be more realistic to consider. So I think the thing that we ultimately sort of settled on is that a V-shaped recovery is just not considerably likely, given the fact that there are just sort of natural limits to the amount of business that the system can accommodate in any one period of time. So in order to kind of have that steep, sharp trajectory backward to that green pre-COVID trajectory, we would need a considerable amount of kind of case disposition and other things through the system, which we all know just takes time and resources that, especially in a post-COVID environment, would be unlikely to occur so rapidly. So really, I think as a unit, we started settling on looking at various kind of ideas between the moderate and the slow regression. I will take a pause because I did see that someone had their hand up, so I want to just give that person a chance to ask their question.
Dr. Norco, was your hand up at one point? It's not up currently, but
Yeah, it was. I was trying to figure out the order of the months seemed odd to me, and then I realized that they're in different years, so I'm okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, and yeah, just to clarify, this spans multiple years starting in 08. So it might be a little small on your screens, and feel free to look at the attached presentation later if you want to give it a closer eye. But and please reach out to the unit for further questions. Happy to take those post this meeting as well. So thanks for the question. And so this is sort of where we got to as a research unit for our 2021 kind of potential forecast. So we started, like I said, looking at moderate or slow regression. The red line with the red squares represents the late 2020 trend. The triangles, we sort of kind of estimated what would happen if there was an early end to the pandemic with the kind of quicker return to case dispositions and people entering and exiting the system closer to what we had seen pre-COVID. And then the blue circles sort of represented to borrow a phrase from our fearless research director here, the kind of middle bowl of porridge, which is there is some return to operations kind of at closer to pre-COVID levels, but a slower sort of onset of those returns. And so that's sometimes taking place in sort of late summer, early fall, where we start to see the increases of cases being disposed and people flowing back into Connecticut's correctional systems for longer sentences. And so really we kind of looked at these three scenarios, and I think ultimately we settled on the sort of preliminary forecast, the blue line, which really is, again, about that sort of, we think, as we know, arrests and other things have rebounded somewhat from lows that were experienced in the early onset of the pandemic in 2020, and arrests are sort of have rebounded since then. So we know that there are people starting to come back into the system, and that those cases are being disposed, and there will, I think, over time, as adaptation continues, has been a big theme of today's discussion, more of those cases will be disposed. And we think that there will be kind of a bump. In the years past, we typically see that in January and February. We did not see that this year, and we think that we will more likely see that sort of bump into the correctional facilities starting in the kind of late summer onward. So with that in mind, I think our ultimate forecast is that we will, by the end of February 2020, or by the beginning of February 2022, we will be back. We know we will experience the decline in the early half of the year and then end up back sort of close to the level that we are at currently, a little bit just under 9,000 folks in correctional facilities in Connecticut. So as you can see the gulf from our 2020 forecast in that green line on this slide and the actual. And so picking up from the actual and the white diamonds is our 2021 forecast. And at this scale, which is a slightly different scale than the previous graph, you can sort of see that it ultimately sort of ends up in a very similar place by the end of our forecast 2021 year. So I've said a lot. Coffee kicked in a little bit. I'll give folks a chance to kind of react and respond, and particularly whether it's Commissioner Quiros or others at the DOC want to weigh in, or anyone else. I'm welcome comments.
online. Good job, Kyle and Mark. As Kyle and Mark indicated, we did meet previously and discussed the trend, and very comfortable. I've been watching these trends now probably for 10, 12 years, and I find them interesting. That OPM for many years were right around the ballpark figure, so they make a lot of sense to me based on the on history and OPM with the predictors being correct. Based on what my team is telling me in corrections with the individuals that we have that are going to be straight up in a sentence, then you add the individuals that are going back out into the community under some form of supervision, whether it's a halfway house placement or a transitional supervision placement. I feel comfortable that we will see this trend happen. We will be under 9,000 probably very soon, within probably the next month, and based on what's projected, it will stay under 9,000. There is a pocket out there that Kyle talked about. Those are the individuals that were diverted or ended up bonding out, that the cases are still pending. Be interesting to see once those cases start getting adjudicated and see how many will return back into the system. That's the only pocket that I can think of that will increase the population. When I take a look at the unsentenced population, the male and female population, our highest years for males unsentenced ends up to be 3,800. I think this morning we were a little bit above 3,200. Female population is at 375, the average high. We're like 225. So even if I was to add 700 more individual into the unsentenced population, it gives me the comfort that that I can move forward with the governor's budget and the announcement, and then the recommendation from the Boston Consulting Group to close up 3 correctional facilities without having to worry about bed space, and without have to worry if there's an uptick that we still will have space for those individuals. That's all I have, Kyle.
Thank you, Commissioner Quiros. I appreciate your insights. This is Mark again, and we appreciate the confidence you have in us. I'm proud that I think this is the 15th edition of the forecast, and we have hovered around the plus or minus 5%, with a major exception of last year's. And I think the part about the forecast I appreciate is because I would be afraid of being a weatherman who's predicting like the weather for the next year. It's only as good as the day that forecast is offered, because you're using all currently available data, and you cannot anticipate major external or internal factors, which is why I think the monthly indicators report and the CJPAC meetings really matter, because we revisit the forecast and we can identify, or we can hypothesize about what factors impacted the population, diverging perhaps from the actual population. It adds a helpful almost baseline against which to track the trend month to month, which we truly hope helps you at a correction leadership level to have additional data to inform your decision making.
The data definitely helps. Yeah, Mark, the data definitely helps us in our decision making. And I want the group to know this is not just the hard work of the Department of Correction. This is everybody on this call, from the Cssd, the Public Defender's Office, all the diversion programs that are out there. This is the entire criminal justice system, working together with the Board of Pardons, with parole, the Parole and Community Service Office that we have. So this is a collaboration of many years' works from this committee and other state agencies to make this possible, and of course the change in laws. That's also it's
very good point, sir. And even before you mentioned the judicial branch, the director of CSSD raised his hand. So Gary, perfect timing. I'd love to invite any questions or feedback you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say, Kevin, excellent job on the presentation, along with Kyle and the others in your shop over there at OPM. And I think Kevin or Mark noted this at the beginning, this is a complex system, right? There's a whole lot of moving parts going on here. And you guys just do a tremendous job of forecasting this year in and year out. So just job well done. You know, we did talk about this at our PJOR subcommittee meeting last week, and I think we all landed on the moderate track, right in the middle, because I know things are picking up in our courts. We have the added technology now of that block scheduling that Judge Carroll and Judge Gold, our Chief Judge of Criminal Matters, are working on with the criminal judges, where you can actually set up a virtual courtroom, right, and have 30, 50 people in a gallery and call a case at a time. It's much more efficient than the previous method that we had to use. So I think virtual business is going to pick up. And you know, the other thing that we've done is we've added FTR lines to all the Department of Correction facilities. Commissioner Karros, thanks to you, Dave Miga, and your crew there in DOC for working with the branch on that. There's now lines in every facility, and we're working on adding second lines to the pretrial facilities, and that's going to increase business. And I know, you know, if Judge Carroll gets his way, we've been talking about often how to keep continuing to expand business in our courts and do more business, but to do it safely, right, with the staff and the public first and foremost in mind. So I would estimate, and this is the conversation we had last week, that I think at a minimum it's the moderate track, and then it might actually skew towards the higher number as we increase business. I know Chris Rapillo and Rich Colangelo have done a lot of work together on working on cases that can go to disposition. So I think as we start to come out of this and we can add more people back into the courts, we're certainly not going to be back to the dockets of the old days, you know, where we had, hundreds of people at 101 Lafayette Street on any given day on multiple floors going into courtrooms, right? But I do think an increase over the summer and then into the fall and towards the end of the year is certainly going to happen. And the other unknown here is, you know, the cases that are out and how quickly we can get those on the docket. The individuals that are held pretrial now are accumulating, and it's interesting to note, and we might get there in this conversation, that the current pretrial population is about 3,100, and I think we were down in the 2,500 range towards the mid to end of summer as we were in the middle of the pandemic, and that's starting to pick up. And I think we're going to eat into that number as we move throughout this year too. But the amount of time that individuals are earning pretrial that will get applied to their disposition, and then how quickly they're available for either TS or parole release, remains to be seen. So again, it's complicated. There's a whole lot of moving parts here, but I think Kevin and Kyle, you guys have done a nice job of forecasting this, and I would agree with that moderate track. So thank you, Mark, for a couple of minutes to comment. I appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
I'm glad you did, sir. And I think, you know, I mentioned some of the natural caveats that have to be applied to a forecast. And I think what really helps with Connecticut's approach in past years is it's never been singularly focused on one point in the system. It's been comprehensive. I thought that on the PJOR call last week, there was an emphasis on the fact that we feel as if we're part of the same team here, working collaboratively on solutions. And that enables us to address these more, I don't know if the right word is nuanced or focused, or maybe, narrower point in the system type of challenges, like the one you just mentioned. It feels quite nuanced, right? The people who are held in DOC pretrial, accumulating jail credits, that population has not been deemed appropriate for transfer to the community for supervision. So there are serious charges, there are serious risk factors and other dynamics. As that population approaches the sentencing, the accumulation of jail time could reduce the amount of sentence time left post-sentencing, which would have a range of implications for DOC's ability to set up assessments and referrals to program in preparation for the community and notification of victims and so much more. So I think we're in a good place to be able to drill into those very nuanced sort of issues and then plan across different points in the system to be prepared. It helps that we're not dealing with large aggregate challenges like a rapidly growing prison population or rapidly spiking crime. there's no sort of silver bullet or arching solutions. We got to focus like a microscope onto points in the system to improve those outcomes. So hearing you say that reminds me of the fact that we're not out of the woods. There's a lot of unpredictability, a lot of uncertainty to come, just as there was last year. It's helpful to begin the moderate place of where we expect the population to go, but we need to keep working together, communicating, collaborating, and using data along with our various expertise represented by people in this room to take on whatever challenges come our way in the next year.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Director Roberge, for that. I just wanted to point out that I hopped back a slide just to kind of second sort of what you were talking about, Gary, just to kind of show, and just to make sure it was clear, what we ultimately settled on for that forecast was that kind of moderate. So it's the kind of red boxes up through September, and then the blue dots from September to February of 2022. That's what our ultimate forecast that I showed in the next slide settled on. But it is to your point. Yes, we see and acknowledge that some of that timing could actually take place even sooner than we ultimately settled on, and maybe we might even in actuality hedge a little closer to the kind of white triangle line that's up there potentially. So it remains to be seen. I think a lot of it too will determine sort of vaccine rollout and other things that currently are ongoing in Connecticut. So we will definitely be keeping a watchful eye in the months ahead, sort of as how our forecast is looking against actual populations. I also want to give, just before we move on, a chance. We have the good fortune, our research director, Kyle, who is really the mastermind of this forecasting process, welcomed home his child. Hopefully doesn't mind that I'm spilling those names, but he welcomed home his baby daughter recently. So we are trying to spare him some of the the onus of actually being the front person today, but he is actually available and on this call, so I wanted to give him a chance to kind of weigh in and fill in any gaps that I might have omitted, or just talk to any of the points that have been brought up. So Kyle, if you have anything you'd like to add to this discussion, please jump in.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you carrying the burden for me while I'm working on many fewer hours of sleep than I'm used to having over the last week or so. But I think you guys all hit the points really firmly and really well. And to Gary's point, I think that the floor is a lot more solid in this forecast than the ceiling. I think what we have a good sense of is that we're not really going to continue to dip like we saw in this time last year. Well, a few months ahead of the time we're at right now, but because we've sort of squeezed all of the short-term sentenced offenders out of the system, and we're sort of down to the higher level sentenced inmates, and we have we're waiting on case processes to pick up and those cases to turn over. But again, sort of modeling or predicting or forecasting how quickly cases turn over and all of the various components that go into the system is a very complex task. And so it's contingent on how things play out over the next couple of months. I think one of the things we wanted to make a point about in this is that and what we leaned on to create a model for this year in a very unusual time is we sort of hybridized our typical operational constraint model that we use looking at historical changes. And we sort of folded in a phenomenon that we've referred to a number of times, either in the monthly indicators report or at CJPAC or at PJOR, called the January bump, where we see a delay in case processes in the latter part of the months of the year that tend to get taken up by the courts in January. We have a slightly longer month, but we also have cases that were maybe held pendencies in November, December that get taken up. And we think that that's going to be a phenomenon that's going to play out in the coming months with the prison population, but it's going to be a much longer duration event rather than a 1 month time frame. And I think that's what we try to incorporate into our model. That's why you see a growth period when we don't normally see a growth period later in the year, as those cases sort of fold in on top of each other. But thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts, Kevin. I appreciate you taking this on. You're doing a great job, and I'll let you continue on with the rest of the presentation. And we're super happy to have Isabel home and swaddled up in her bassinet in the room right over. So thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Kyle. And we're just lucky and glad to see you this morning. So thanks for making time to just be here.
I agree. This is Mark again, and I wanted to call on you, Kyle, but I said I'm going to give the guy some space. I don't know if he's doing a rush bottle delivery to his daughter or helping out. So I thank you, Kevin. You were spot on to bring in Kyle, and it's so nice to hear from him. And the division got to see some pictures of Isabel's homecoming, and it was quite something. It was a real family affair to welcome her in. We have the next recidivism, and Kevin, I don't know if you want to move ahead to just slide 13. I wanted to share with the group perhaps a kickoff just of this section, some initial takeaways. You know, I was really struck about sorry, I guess I meant to say slide 12, Kyle. Oh, I guess our numbers are off. The previous one, if you don't mind, with the what comes next after this one? Did it get removed or no? Okay, that's it. Perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to share everything. You, Kevin, you're good. Was that the recidivism is a report that we're required to produce every year, and I applaud that we contribute this to discussions because it provides a baseline. It really tracks everyone who was discharged or released from a DOC facility in a given year. Because that's the entire aggregate end size, and then our report studies them, following them for the following months to track the rate at which they return to prison, answering the question of what is the rate at which people return to prison following release or discharge, what is the recidivism rate? And we do it on a monthly basis, encompassing a three-year or 36-month period. And similar to the forecast, it's a large end size, right? Because it's everybody. And so there is not a lot of movement in recidivism. Our indications are that the recidivism rate is going down slightly. In 2014, 53% of people returned within a 3-year period. In 2015, it was 40%. In 2017, it's 49%. So in terms of trend, it's in the right direction. And in a population of that size, of all releases from DOC, that's a good number. To see that trend happening. It's relatively similar to the sort of the compilation of recidivism rates across all the states, which introduces this challenge. On one hand, recidivism really matters. It's an outcome measure to be tracked. However, it's very difficult to do it across state because every state system is so unique. In one profound way, we operate a unified system in Connecticut. We're one of about 6 states that does that. So our recidivism report tracks anyone who came back to a correctional facility, jail or prison, whether you're there for a week or a month or a year or several years. Other states, that short-term populations wouldn't show up. They would go to county jail and not necessarily be included. So there's always a caution that I associate with it. I think that we should track this number. So I think recidivism is the right goal for us to be having. The impact of recidivism is crucial for public safety. It's demonstrative of the impact on outcome, and it has impacts on cost and population too. So Kevin will walk you through what the latest recidivism rate indicates, and it's similar to the last forecast and Commissioner Kiros's remarks. This is a reflection of the overall system. This isn't like a DOC sole metric. This is the DOC population as it then moves on to the next stage in the process of supervision and return to the community. The 3 things I wanted to point out that might be undercurrents or noted on slides that really stood out to me when I reviewed Kevin's work is number 1, and they really tie into, I think, also public safety issues. Number 1 is the initial months and initial years of someone's return to the community matter quite a lot. Although supervision lengths will vary based on the person and based on the type, within of the people who returned to prison within 3 years, 38% of them returned within the first 6 months, and 61% of them who recidivated returned within the first 12 months, and 90% returned within the first 24 months. So that aligns with all our knowledge of reentry, that those first months and years really matter, and therefore it's important to focus our resources to front load them on that period when people's risk is the highest, knowing that it will recede over time. Number two is that not all populations are the same regarding risk. We don't have risk assessment results in here, but we do have number of prior sentences to the DOC and can show that there is a correlation between number of prior sentences and likelihood that you will return to prison. So as number of touches of the correction system go up, the rate of recidivism does as well. And finally, supervision really matters. We do unpack why people returned. And people can return to prison because they violate the conditions of their supervision and they are remanded, or they could come back on a new criminal conviction. And I think that also matters because it shows that some people exit to no supervision, EOS, some people transition to parole, or to and even within the parole, they could be on different types of programming. So that tells me that it's helpful to know this. It's a crucial baseline, and there's more, I'm sure, detail we can really wrestle out of the data that we have. Thanks to the DOC for sharing it. But there are probably opportunities in the future to drill in for narrower, more focused studies that could give us more real time and also give us smaller N sizes. Smaller N sizes enable us to do more dynamic analysis of the data and the changes. So I want to give that kind of big picture view from where I sit, knowing that you're going to get some really rich, detailed insights from Kevin on his work in the following slides. And again, please feel free to raise your hands or jump in with any clarifying questions or comments, and we'll pause again at the end.
Thanks so much, Mark. And to just jump on, I will say too that this analysis really relies a lot on the data provided to us from the DOC. So I just wanted to say at the outset to thank them, and particularly Mary Lansing, who has helped provide us the data for these analyses over a number of years. And I just wanted to thank the contributions and the partnership there for allowing us data to do these analyses. And I think to Mark's comments at the outset here, that's right. I think we as a unit have really looked to these analyses, and particularly this year's, as sort of kind of setting up a baseline comparison that we can do. So just to remind everyone, because it has been a bit of time since our last recidivism report, been a year, what we did as a unit previously for last year's report was in 2020, we compared returns to prison over a 12-month period for people who were released from a DOC facility in 2017 to those who were released in 2015. So we had two different cohorts, the 2017 release cohort and the 2015 cohort, and we compared their returns to prison over a 12-month period. So this graph is taken from our 2020 report. The light blue is the 2015 cohort, and there was data available for 36 months for that. But in 2020 report, we only had data to show up to 12 months. So that is the kind of comparison time frame. And what we found in that report was that for both cohorts, the rates of return were very, very similar. In fact, almost exactly the same at the 12-month period. So for the 2021 recidivism analysis, what we wanted to do was basically build on that, and then this time extend it for this 36-month follow-up period. So just to kind of recap, what we mean when we say recidivism is, for the purposes of this report, we use a returns to prison definition. So there are multiple ways one can refine recidivism for analyses. Sometimes reports studies use rearrest as the indicator. Sometimes people use new sentences or new convictions. In our case, and partly because Connecticut is a unified system, we use returns to prison. That was something that was used last year, but we also used it this year because we feel like it, given the fact that our correctional facilities encompass both sentenced and pretrial unsentenced individuals, it's a good indicator of kind of a somewhat serious resumption in criminal behavior if someone is returned to prison. So that is why we use that definition, although in future analyses, we may also resume using some of the other metrics that I mentioned, such as arrest or sentence, convictions, things of that nature. But for this purpose, when I say recidivism, I'm really talking about returns to prison. And that's consistent with last year's report. Another thing consistent with last year's report is that we limited the population to the sentenced population that were released or discharged into the community, either in 2015 or 2017. So in our release cohorts, as we call them, we did not include people who were being held unsentenced in correctional facilities. We followed only those who were sentenced and being either released on a discretionary mechanism or discharged, or in other words, put back into the community after serving an incarceral sentence. And then one change that we did make for the 2021 report, and it made only a small adjustment to our overall cohort size, although it didn't necessarily change the complexion, was that we excluded folks who were coded in the DOC data that we had for analysis that were coded as a legal status of X. That's sort of a composite group of individuals, some of whom are held either federally or held on interstate compacts, and also there are some who had been returned to prison previously and then were being released and having their special parole reinstated. So it's a composite group, and we sort of set those aside because they are all somewhat different, and they also have somewhat different follow-up requirements. So we sort of set those aside for this year so we could really focus on a core population of folks that were sentenced by Connecticut and served in Connecticut and then released into Connecticut communities. So that was what we chose for our definition. So just to give a quick rundown on what that study population for 2021 looks like, you can see in these boxes, and I know there's a lot here, so I won't read every line in every row, but I'll just point out that for our two release cohorts that we used, the sentence population, so the overall size for 2015 release cohort was 10,361. For the 2017 cohort, it was about 10% smaller, so 9,293. The proportions of male and female were roughly similar. Again, the 2017 cohort was slightly smaller, but there were very similar populations. The bottom tables really show the cohorts by age categories and across gender. And I think the important thing to know is really the composition for both 2015 and 2017 were quite similar. The key difference is I think 2017 skewed just a tiny bit older age-wise. You can see that the kind of numbers of 15 to 25-year-olds were 2,098 in our 2015 release cohort, and they were had kind of reduced a bit to 1,647 in our 2017 cohort. So slightly older, but otherwise roughly very comparable two cohorts. And again, the 2017 overall just a 10% smaller. And so what did we find? Well, I think a theme is that we saw a similarity, although a slight divergence. So really, when we compare over this 36-month follow-up period, the blue dot line being 2015 returns to prison and the triangle line being the 2017, you can see that they track roughly almost identical until we get closer out to the 36-month period. So there is a divergence there, but in general, over this time period, the two cohorts followed very similar return trajectories. So the bottom axis, the x-axis here again, is just the months since being released, and the y here is the percentage of the cohort returned to prison. So just to clarify for folks in case it isn't clear, and so just to kind of hone in a slight bit on that similarity but slight divergence. This is similar chart to the one that was produced in 2020, and really just kind of shows that if you look at each month and you compare the two cohorts, there is some slight differences, but really it's all within a percentage point of each other in terms of the return rates. So really very similar, although we again, by month 36, the 2017 cohort has returned at a slightly lower rate, 49%, as opposed to 50% observed in our 2015 cohort. I think one thing I will mention which makes 2017 unique and different from the 2015 cohort, is that our 36-month kind of observation period did overlap to some extent with the COVID pandemic for the 2017 cohort. So it's something that we are a bit mindful of, that there could be a hard to determine COVID impact on return rates. So something we'll be keeping an eye on in future analyses, especially as we start looking at more recent cohorts as well, to see if there is a COVID effect that we can determine on return rates. But just wanted to mention that as a slight difference that the 2017 cohort would have been exposed to versus the 2015 cohort during that 36-month period. One thing, and I think Mark touched on this at the outset, and I think it's really important to talk about here, is that a lot of the returns occurred within those first 12 months. And I think what is very interesting to the research unit is that there is a shift in pattern over time of what types of returns drive people coming back into correctional facilities. And really within the early months and the first year, where we see the highest volume of returns, a lot of that is driven by technical violations and or criminal violations, and then to a lesser extent, new sentences and new charges. So you'll see these categories. These are coded from the DOC data that was provided to us. And just to kind of give a bit of clarity, when we say technical violations, we mean from the data standpoint, people who were coded as being returned from one of the release mechanisms, such as parole or special parole, or even probation in a way, and then they were coded as returned. And then if they were coded as returned with either new charges or a new sentence, that would be kind of in that criminal violation. Contrast to that, folks with new charges get that designation if they are coded as readmitted with a new charge, but not noted as having a new sentence imposed. Otherwise, if they are readmitted but noted as having a new sentence, then they would be coded in that darkest red, which is a new sentence category. So I mention all that just to say, again, that as we look at this over time for 2015, and then again for our 2017 cohort, the pattern is almost identical. You can barely tell any difference. And really, it's in those early months, it's these technical violations driving a lot of returns. And then as we get further out into our follow-up time horizon, by the 36-month period, the vast majority of the returns are driven by new charges, or in some cases, new sentences. So that's something we wanted to highlight to kind of bear in mind, that shift over time for this. The kind of other thing that Mark mentioned, and again, we think this is an important component, is we looked at the prior number of sentences and categorized the cohort, the 2017 cohort individuals, into different groupings based on their prior sentence history. And so then we looked at those categories of prior sentence histories over time and what their return rates looked like. And so this chart starts out with the lowest line there, the lightest rectangles are those with no prior sentence to being released on their first sentence. So as you can see, those individuals return by the 36-month mark at a 32% rate, whereas we contrast that with the darkest blue line at the very top, which is folks who had, at the time of release, 12 or more prior sentences. Those folks are shown to return to prison by the 36-month mark at a 65% rate. So there is a really strong correlation here between the prior sentences and the likelihood of returning to prison in the future. And this is consistent with other research on risk that exists, and sentence history that exists. And it's certainly something that stood out to us in the research unit as something to keep in mind and bear in mind as we think about recidivism analyses and ways to impact rates. I think I'll point out, it's not in this slide, but I believe that group that has 12 or more prior sentences at the time of release is not a small population within our cohort, 2017 cohort, I think it was something along the lines of 13% of our 2017 cohort. So it is a somewhat sizable group, and something just to kind of keep in mind if there are a number of ways the system can kind of help keep people from accruing sentence histories over time that might overall shift their likelihood of whether they return to correctional facility. So again, I just wanted to highlight that. And then I think kind of lastly, I just wanted to circle back for some kind of key takeaways from our 2021 report here, which is again, both the cohorts in our study had extremely similar rates over time, particularly by the first 12 months, and then looking out toward the 36 months, there was a slight divergence. Even with 2017 similar cohort size, again, the proportion of those types of those return types, whether that was technical violations in the early months or new charges in the later months, that was almost remarkably consistent with the 2015 cohort. So again, those patterns are very same from across each cohort. Again, prior sentence history continues to be predictive of the increased likelihood in returning to prison, which our previous slide just highlighted. And then lastly, again, that divergence, I touched on it earlier, but the COVID pandemic did sort of overlap with the 2017 cohort's 36-month look. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on as we continue to do these recidivism analyses to sort of see if there are more measurable effects and impacts of COVID on return rates or other things that we see. So I'm not saying that's necessarily the driver of that difference that we observed in the 36-month rate, but it's certainly something that could potentially affect both what we observed this year and then in future analyses. So something to keep an eye on. And then I'll turn it back to you, Mark, if you want to kind of take it from here.
Thanks, Kevin. Just wanted to say great job on this. I know you kind of inherited a report that had been done by Kyle in many prior years, and you moved in seamlessly to take it over, and you added some tremendous insights and innovations to this. And I'm going to turn to Commissioner Quiros, as I know he and his team do have to depart in a minute. So I just would like to leave sort of one, actually, no, I think I might have lost my thought. I think I was rushing out of my head so that the good commissioner wouldn't have to feel rushed, and now I've forgotten it. So that's probably a good thing, actually. So I will turn to, sorry about that. One of those things where you finicky way the brain works. But Commissioner Quiros, sir, if you or any member of your team wish to comment or provide any input, we'd be grateful for it before I know you have to head out.
Yeah, no, thanks to Kevin, Kyle, and you again. Great information with that the 2015 group cohort and 2017, and looking at the 2021. The one thing that sticks out for me in those two groups is the decrease in the VOPP violations from our unit, and trying to work with the population out there in the community, and not the first incident bring it right back. So I think that is very helpful for us, and I'm just interested. I'm a data-driven individual, so
yes, you are.
That 49%. When I talk with that cohort, it appeared that is it's a high number, even though it went down compared. I like to talk more about it. Within 6 months, 20% of the individuals will be coming back. So that's 2 out of 10 people. Then within a year, 30% will be coming back with a new charge. That's 3 out of 10. So just great job overall, great presentation overall. I mean, you're right. My mind's already switching to my first virtual graduation as a permanent commissioner. Actually, this is the first time marking for the group that yesterday I did announce too that the acting deputy commissioner, William Mulligan, is going to become the permanent deputy commissioner of operations. So this is the first time we're walking in together. We're all permanent. So before that, Sharonda Carlos, the youngest one, was the only one that was permanent. So, so thank you, Mark.
We are thrilled. Quite a team you built. And thank you for your remarks, sir. And having been to one graduation, I know it's not the same to do it virtual, but I hope that the faces of the multi-generations of families who contributed to public service in this manner will, you'll be able to see their eyes and the pride. I remember seeing the badges being pinned or removed from the pinned boards, and that was just such a powerful moment of passing the torch to the next generation. So it's a big day for you all, and we're glad you spent as much time with us as you could. I see oh, go ahead, sir. Go ahead,
We'll be off
Commissioner.
like 10:45. We'll log off, Mark.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir. Gary Roberge, thank you for your hand. We'd love to hear what's on your mind.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, again. And, having seen this last week again in our PJOR subcommittee meeting and years past, great work, Kevin, you and your team on putting this information together. It amazes me how consistent this data remains, cohort over cohort. And, we see the same things in many of the data points that we collect here in the branch on our probation, pretrial, family data with respect to outcomes. I just wanted to point out that, and I understand because we've always measured this metric in this report with returns to prison, we should be careful and make sure that when, because Kevin, as you explained, there's different ways to measure recidivism, right? And here in the branch, we've always measured ours with respect to our metrics with a new rearrest, right? And it's different. And I understand we're talking about people leaving prison here and then going back, so why we use it this way here. And I've talked to my team here about adding that metric into what we measure here, but we feel strong about new arrest for the work that we do, because we have people in the community that we're supervising, and new arrest in the community is what we're trying to prevent and coming back through the system. So I just wanted the group, this body, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, because at some point I'll be presenting information, or somebody from the branch will be presenting on our recidivism information, and there's a distinction there between how we measure it. And to be fair, throughout the country, people do it very differently in many different ways. For the purposes of this particular exercise, I do understand, but I just wanted to make that point. And maybe at some point in the future we can have tables that know both, for each population as we move forward. But I think that this is positive information. I think we have work to do on the technical violations, like the commissioner. By the way, Commissioner, congratulations on your permanency. I think we have work to do on the technical violations. I know we do here in the branch with our probation violations. So I think that's a place that we can take a deeper dive as to what's leading to those technical violations, and how can we maybe make a difference in that area and reduce those and have fewer people coming back in early on. I think that'll be a big system improvement for us. We can always do better in that. So, Kevin, just again, thanks for the information. I always look forward to this beginning of the year report, because I think it really helps us see where we've been and what we have to pay attention to moving forward, and how we can continue collectively as a body to make a progress and a difference in the work that we're doing. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for a moment to comment.
I'm glad you did, sir. And I know prior recidivism reports we have done have included arrest, and I think that's a sensitive measure that can be conducted and can provide really deep insights into reoffense and behavior. In some ways, it's a lower threshold and an essential one to gauge interactions with law enforcement, and it's especially important for the end of sentence population, which is not under is not under conditions of supervision, and perhaps has a lower threshold that could result in a referral to a correctional facility. So I think that's you're raising the right point for CSS. That CSSD does include the rearrest, and I know past studies we have included it, and we felt that today's report would be the baseline of recidivism analysis that we conduct, and recognize that we're one of many units in the state that's conducting recidivism. So we really thought this would be appropriate fit for the research minds, data-driven minds, to continue talking about different ways recidivism is calculated and reported. So that because I think, you know, my big takeaway is that with an N size this large, with such a heterogeneous population, it can tell you a lot about how the overall system is functioning, but it won't have the dynamic, the real time, the more nuanced analysis. And I said I wanted to mention kind of one quick recapitulation of what I said earlier about, you know, my big takeaways. I think they all have three sort of reminders of effective policy and practice. And that is number one, the early months and years of post-release supervision and return to the community really matter. So front load. It's something like if we can get the person successfully through with supervision and programming the first 6, 12, 18 months, their chances of recidivism dramatically decline. So if we can't, so stretching the resources so broadly may limit the ability to move them up front. And that's my big takeaway there. And number two is trust the risk assessment, that populations have varying levels of low, medium, high risk on top of other factors in the case, but risk can tell you quite a lot about chances of reoffense and return. And again, just like a given month in a supervision term will differ in terms of likelihood of reoffense, an individual's likelihood of reoffense will vary based on the results of that instrument. And finally, supervision matters. You know, the chart that Kevin shared the different ways that people come back to prison, some on technical violations, some on a criminal charge or a sentence. And someone who's on parole, special parole, probation is subject to conditions and therefore has greater structure assigned to them for that period. So I think those are all fruitful discussions to bring to perhaps a research subcommittee under CJPAC to potentially report back to the full commission, or just perhaps, we want this conversation to begin today but move forward more collectively. I have one more thought to share as a part of a transition for the remainder perhaps of our time, but I don't want to make that an abrupt shift until I give people a chance to weigh in with any other questions or comments they may have.
I'll just add really quickly, Mark, that I again, Director Roberge, thank you for those comments. I think the research unit, we share your appetite and your interest, and I think both comparing kind of multiple measures again in the future analyses, and also kind of maybe looking at other things like Mark mentioned, like risk adjusted groupings and other kind of subgroup analyses that we might consider. So we have a lot of appetite to kind of augment and also enhance sort of what's been reported on in a baseline report kind of this year in future activities. So looking forward to kind of keeping those discussions ongoing.
Many thanks, Kevin, and hats off to you for a great job. To you, Patrick, Kyle, this is great work. And I would say too, I know I have another slide with some of the written words, but I think I can probably convey them verbally, and feel free to turn it off so we can at least see each other if you like. But again, great job, Kevin, terrific work. I had some conversations with some of the victim advocates who serve on CJPAC about, you know, victimization survey and the topic of victimization. And I know Natasha had some challenges with the technology. She may be on by phone. I know that Beth and Lucy from the Alliance were on earlier, and I know that Jerry Wild from the Coalition were on a bit. So don't put any of them on the spot, but did want to acknowledge that we had some discussion leading up to today about, you know, what are ways we could look at a similar to recidivism measure for victims, victimization. And I thought there's something really profound to what I learned in those conversations. And one thing we're thinking about, I've always been inspired by this term that Susan Herman produced called parallel justice, the idea that we should be looking at parallel tracks of responses to perpetration of crime and responses to victimization of crime. And just as the criminal justice system activates necessarily following an arrest, there should be, we should look at where are the arrays of services and supports and resources that are made available to make that victim whole, restored, back to wellness, and supported. And we have some great examples, the judicial branch, the Alliance's partnership on the collaborative model, how that wraps around victims with services and supports and helps them to follow an individual's movement through post-conviction criminal justice. We also have growing awareness about different types of victimization, the way that people's experience of sexual violence can perpetuate, causing trauma over a lifetime, or intimate partner violence and so on. So I thought maybe that, with the remaining time we have, to just think about what are some lessons learned perhaps on recidivism that could be a fit for the victim survivor side, knowing that we won't get to it all today, but the team, the advocates I spoke to did flag that this might be worth the discussion later on. I saw one hand go up already from our Chief State's Attorney, Rich Colangelo. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, that the victimization part is huge. I mean, I was asked one of the first questions after the George Floyd tragedy, when, why is there a disparate impact in the, correctional system for minority populations? And then when I looked into it a little bit, I found that, most of our minority population revolves, lives in, Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, and about 64% of that's about 62% of the minority population. About 64% of the minority population, 64% of the reported violent crime happens in those 3 cities. And looking at the recidivism report and the, when you allow for criminal records, it really gets rid of any disparate impact when you're looking at systems. But, my mantra has always been, and I want to try and change the narrative a little bit, it's the victimization of those populations that we have to worry about to make sure that each of them are, have the same opportunities that suburbs do to let their kids be safe when they walk down the street to school, that, they can go to the grocery store when they want to and not have to worry about, a crime being committed against them or near them. So I think victimization is a great thing to look at.
Thank you, sir. Good points. And compelling statistics, we included that slide in the prosecutor data presentation for that reason. To the coalition, the alliance, and to Natasha, she's able to join. Just wanted to, I tried to do my best at capturing some of the discussion, knowing it wasn't comprehensive or authoritative, but didn't want to offer it up if anyone wishes to provide input or comments. The floor is open.
Hi, Mark. This is Beth at the Alliance. Thanks so much for bringing up the conversation. I really appreciate it. And I really look forward to working with Natasha and other folks on the committee to identify ways that we can bring just more data in general. I think one of the great things about this group is we get your presentations and all the information that your team pulls together that really paints a picture for us. And I think it would be really helpful to have some of those, maybe not the same data points, but similar data, on the victimization side, and to think about the ways that we could bring on an ongoing basis versus the presentations, sort of instilling or institutionalizing a practice where we're hearing more about the work of the Victim Issue Subcommittee, but also the impacts on victims in general. And I really appreciate also your point around the post-conviction model. I do think that's a place where we're working very successfully to identify both the impacts on victims as their offenders are being supervised and treated, but also it provides us with good opportunities to get victim feedback back into the process. So what in general would make that system more accessible? What would make it easier to navigate? What are the kinds of information that perhaps victims and survivors of these crimes would need to have at their fingertips that they just don't have access to? And I think there's just really, really great opportunities with this group because there's so many important stakeholders on it for us to really consider how do we make, how one, do we get information to everybody's, in front of everybody's eyes? But secondly, how do we make that system more accessible, easier to navigate, and more understandable for the victims of the crimes, right, who are also forced to navigate the criminal legal system. And so that's work at the Alliance. I know CCADV, similarly, we've had some conversations there, are really looking forward to digging in with Natasha to trying to figure out how we bring that back to this group and how we start to think about victims in the same ways, right, in terms of the system-based response and the sort of access that they will have to the system.
Very helpful, Beth. Thank you for those important points. And if I'm not sure if Jerry or Lori or others may have additional comments, I just noticed the cameras are on and would love to hear any insights you may have or not. But Jerry, I'm not sure if you would wish to.
No, thank you. I just wanted to ditto what Bethany said. I mean, this data is all great. And I know for us, for CCADV, we specifically, would be interested in looking at some of the data if it could be run the data being restructured specific to types of victimization. And I know the data that was shared talked about prior sentencing history, but maybe also the different types of sentences, sentence length, and what those reconvictions were they still, like, again, for domestic violence, were they domestic violence related or, sexual assault, but again, separating out by victim type, I guess.
That's a good point. That's you speak to just like the different ways that there's subgroups and cohorts within this total population. And we talk about DOC population, it's inclusive of property, drug, violence, sex, all types of offenses, low, medium, high, and very sentencing length. So I think these are all the right things to unpack when you're trying to do a more focused analysis on it. And I think the parallel justice track I brought up earlier was a reminder that just as the individual is transiting the criminal justice system or the criminal legal system, so are the victims too, because they are tracking through the various automatic notification, the help they get from victim advocates within the courts, within the various alliances or coalitions or other entities. They're following along that, and the outcomes and the decisions that are made, have impacts on that victim's sense of and real safety. And so the ability to look at, as this system manages these individuals who have committed crime, there's also a way to surround victims with supports they need, both the knowledge of what is happening in the system, and then how we can support them. So I feel like there is almost like a whole separate parallel track that maybe we could figure out where there's applicable data that could be applied on the victim side. We've gotten different snippets of it in prior presentations, but maybe what Beth was saying earlier is helpful is a more recurring sort of area of report outs or detail. And that could help, I think, the victims and survivors and their advocates who are part of CJPAC to feel they have a recurring space to share the analysis and vet it and get so I always feel data is a good convening force, and that can be a potential way to use that information in a setting like this. Well, very good. Well, it sounds like the Victim Issue Subcommittee has been meeting on a monthly basis in the new calendar year. And I think this is something we can bring back to the group. And I know, Beth, you've had the pleasure of meeting within the Alliance, some new team members you have who possess great skills in research and data analysis and so forth. And I know that we benefited from the presentations the coalition has brought forward on a host of areas regarding calls to the lethality assessment program line and so much more. So I feel like we've had these moments of presentation, but it sounds like the desire is for there to be something more perhaps consistent and steady and data driven in this area. So I'm happy to explore what the best fit is and work within the Victim Issue Subcommittee as well as this capacity on the commission. Gary, I see your hands up, and I'd be grateful for any insights you may have. I know you've done a lot of kind of analysis in this area. Great to hear you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to jump in again. I just wanted to say that I think Jerry makes an excellent point, as did Beth and Lori in prior comments, that the victimization piece is really important. And we were talking about taking a deeper dive on the technical violations, and we should across the board into all, including new arrests and what are they coming back for, right, and being arrested for. But just to your point around the victimization, I think that's why the branch feels it's important to take, to measure our arrests at the highest standard of new arrest, our recidivism at the highest standard of new arrest, because really our goal, our objective is to not have people come back through the system and to reduce victimization in our communities, right? And that's by eliminating new arrests. So that's kind of how we look at things and why we measure it that way. So I think all those points that you all just make, including you, Mr. Chair, are spot on, and that's exactly what we should stay focused on as we move forward. So thank you.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. And Beth, just brainstorming if there are, various either national or in-state experts or collaborators or experts in the area of victimization that we could, bring in, and set targets for presentations of CJPAC. I feel like that's one benefit that we can bring is a established once a month 2-hour meeting where you can count on having high-level stakeholders and administrators around the table. With with Dr. Norco's presentation last month about mental health, our goal is to have the authors of that report join a virtual meeting to discuss strategies for front-end diversion to mental health treatment. If there are people that would be, we could target a date for them to present and help us to think more deeply about ways to incorporate victimization analysis into the work. That could be a potential fit I'd be very supportive of.
Yeah, Mark, I'd love to work with you on that. I think we have some ideas about some folks that might be good that we've talked about here at some of the meetings we've had. So I would definitely love to follow up with you and Natasha and the rest of the committee to make that happen for sure.
Appreciate that. Very good. Well, thank you, everybody. I love data. I'm like that old, remember I was in elementary school, they had the number muncher game where he some sort of, he was like, I remember on an old Apple desktop and you could move this alien creature around like a tic-tac-toe board and you use your times tables, division table, et cetera, multiplication tables to eat the numbers. And we made you eat a lot of numbers today, and that's a credit to our research team, Kyle, Kevin, Patrick, for their hard work on this. So thank you for tolerating this much data coming at you. It was a really great discussion, and I know it's a tough format to come out of like full screen share. We were very proud of our slides, and I hope that helped to paint the picture for everybody. We used our whole 2 hours and on these topics, and I'm excited about our March meeting when we come back together again. Different flavor to the meeting, but I hope the same robust discussion. But thank you all. I know a lot of us are Zoomed out, Teamsed out, and these meetings matter a lot, and I hope they provide a good value to folks. I hope you all have a good rest of your day. I guess we're nearing 11 o'clock hour, so I'll just let it wind down, but have a good rest of your day, everybody. Stay safe, be well, and we'll see you next month for the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Great job, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Stay safe.